Hello, everybody, and welcome to Unlock Your Recruiting Power, Embrace the Change with Emerging Tech Trends as our topic today. I'm Matt Novishadli, CEO of Now Business Intelligence. We're a concierge staffing company as well as a custom software development company. I'd like to welcome our guest, Sam Pendleton. Sam has been involved in every aspect of technical staffing for well over 20 years. Sam is currently the founder and CEO of the Bowmore Group, a concierge staffing company. And Now Business Intelligence, my company, has partnered with Sam successfully now for 10 plus years. It's been a very great relationship. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely. We've worked together a long time now, Matt. So we know each other well, and we've lamented over many different issues over the years. Obviously, when I've been trying to fill positions at your company, and obviously out there in the tech world generally.
Agreed. For those of you who attended our last webinar, just a little housekeeping here. Blockchain, the brain drain. Welcome back. For those of you who missed it, the video can be watched from my NBI's Now Business Intelligence LinkedIn page. Let's get right into today's webinar. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about the emergence, about some major emerging workplace trends. That's quite a tongue twister. As we've all experienced, the workplace is settling into a new post-COVID normal. Technology continues to move the work anywhere to the work from anywhere trend, also called location agnostic culture, forward, with people-centered practices in the spotlight. Meanwhile, there's a struggle to retain valuable employees and move as things move to the metaverse, VR, and other technologies. So today I'd like to talk about the main three emerging trends of technology, social issues, and then the candidates themselves and how they all fit into this. Before I dig in, I'd like to focus this webinar a little bit. If people in the audience could let us know in the chat, what their role in the organization is. Are you in HR, program management, talent acquisition, etc.? That'd be great to know. So feel free to type anytime in the comments through the whole seminar. There are no dumb questions and no topic off limits. So let's dive right in. Sam, I want to talk about technology first, and things like VR, augmented reality. Apple's coming out with its Vision Pro at the end of this year, which is a super cool technology where you wear the headset, but it has a camera on the front, but it superimposes your face back in the meeting. So if I was wearing it right now, which I'm not, I wish I was, I'd look just like this, but I'd be able to interact, see body language, even stand up in the room or walk around a virtual conference table. What have you been experiencing around VR and augmented reality out there?
Well, most of what I've experienced so far has been within tech companies. I work pretty heavily in the financial services side, and I know it's something that companies are looking at, but they still have a more formal approach. And I think that's pretty much the way with government contracting as well. It may come in, and it's definitely got its advantages. And talking from my own military experience and knowing also that there's training going on currently in the military using VR, it's something that's coming forward and is going to keep coming forward. As you just mentioned, you can have the look and feel of being in a meeting. You and I would be looking at each other. Body language is a huge thing, and that's something people, I wouldn't say are losing, but they're missing a little bit. If you're sat in a meeting, you can tell if someone's anxious or even uncomfortable in a certain conversation. And VR is going to... I'm sorry?
I said, or like flicking their pencil around or tapping their fingers, all of that.
Yeah. And I have actually found out that there's been a few VR interviews as well. And of course, body language is certainly very important when it comes to interviews. You're looking for someone who's confident. You're looking for signs that they're confident in their self as well as the skill set. We all know there's a lot of people that can do a specific skill set, whether it's coding, whether it's data or whatever, but have they got a personality to also interact with a customer? that's obviously, for some people it's vital, for other it's not at all. And that kind of goes into the whole what we're talking about post COVID. Can we work remotely? Would VR add something to that? And again, I think we discussed it a little bit last week. A lot of companies have embraced remote work. So VR, I think, is going to carry on expanding. It's going to get bigger and better. As you mentioned, the metaverse, of course, is the biggest thing out there at the moment. But then there's companies launching as VR as a service. So they're going to be providing platforms, much like Google Meet, much like Skype, etc. All these companies, Microsoft Teams, for example. But it's going to be a VR platform. So they will supply VR headsets for offices, and then the whole service comes with it. So that's something that's coming as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like a virtual Zoom, etc. Is it?
Yeah.
I've noticed some of the augmented reality stuff too for training, and you mentioned the military, like teaching someone to defuse a bomb. I know even my rudimentary VR rig I have here, um, my controllers, I can move my fingers and I can grab a wrench just by grabbing it. It gives a little haptic vibration feedback, and that's about it. But have you seen any of the companies starting to use the more augmented reality for training yet, or is that a little bit cutting edge still?
No, definitely for training. It's something that can be used and has been used. I know that for a fact. And again, I'm talking. So you mentioned ordnance disposal. Now, my background involves some of that, and knowing the world that works. So I'm still very much involved with quite a lot of my ex-naval friends, divers, EOD guys, and so on. And yes, training is actually taking part, but also not only that, the identification of some of these modules they're finding, these IEDs, etc. That they can use VR to identify, to show, and then pass that back in real time to somebody that might be on a different continent on a satellite link, or they might be 300 yards back behind a truck.
Right.
So it's you're only putting one person in the line of fire as such. I mean, with 9 times out of 10 still, when you identify an IED, the first option is, do you just blow it in sight? And if you can't, then you have to start figuring out things like that. So yes,
Right.
there are definitely examples. And I'm sorry, I've got off a little bit and gone back to military style, but it's interesting that people are using it. And of course, there's no more to the point than that. But when you think about even maintenance of particular engines, like say a Rolls-Royce gas turbine engine, if you can use VR and then practice moving in a very constricted area, which such as gas turbines are, whether they're on ships, planes, it's all the same. You're normally they're encased in a module and you don't have a lot of room. So VR will give you that feeling of what it's like to work in a very confined area.
Yeah,
And
probably eventually with Boston Robotics and companies like that, you'll be working the robot, but it'll look like you're there with the robot's hands. I mean, they're getting pretty
absolutely.
far.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point. You're touching on that. It won't be long till that sort of technology exists. I mean, we know people are working on it, and obviously you know that and you've worked within the AI world as well, which is a discussion we may well talk about in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's amazing what's going on out there, and of course, we've seen changes ourselves in the last 30 years of work. Because obviously we're both in our 50s. We've been around a little while, so we've experienced different things, looked at different things, used different things. So it's fascinating to watch, and I think it's only going to carry on going forward.
Yeah, I remember when our office got the first fax machine. That was exciting. That was exciting. It was so high tech, right?
Yeah.
One of the other aspects of this, it's the VR, the Zoom meetings, augmented reality. They're all about being able to be in a place instantly without necessarily traveling there. And I've seen a huge trend where back 15 years ago, for instance, when I worked at Raytheon, they had 980, which was like you know every other Friday off by working 10-hour days in the week. and that was really novel. And they were trying to draw. That's pretty ahead of their time for a defense company. They're trying to draw more technologically savvy talent, right? Like a more private company would do. And I've seen this almost even the company I'm working with right now has no meeting Friday once a month, which basically means you don't have to work. Uh, so I've seen this sort of in almost every client now moving towards some type of hybrid working where you're either 100. In my case, in the one company I'm working with, they call themselves location agnostic, and they take pride that there's people in Serbia, here in Texas, South Korea, and we're all working together. Time zones get tricky, but we pull it off. There's no requirement to be anywhere at any particular time. It's all done through Google Meet, and that's one of the extremes in my experience. Not everybody is just 100% remote, and it's not a terribly small company. It's almost 200 and something people.
Yeah.
I've I've seen a trend towards more of some hybrid approaches. Have you seen the same thing out there?
Definitely. Again, as we mentioned, post-COVID, things have changed. Now, even with companies or certain companies now wanting people back in, they've. And I can name a couple that I've had good conversations with, where they put in the policy in place that they wanted people back in. They soon realised within probably 8 to 12 weeks, 2 to 3 months, that it's suddenly a lot of problems stopped. Again, people need time off for dentists, for taking the kids here, for doing this. All that wasn't there. And you take away the commute and you have that time scale of people working. Because
Right.
also, you remember, a lot of people, we can track when somebody logs on. That's very normal for most large companies. Server-based data, logins, they can track when you're online, when you're not online. So you have a good idea if you're working in the tech industry specifically, which of course we do, it's tracked. Pretty much everything's tracked. And I'm talking even in the staffing world. We know how many phone calls have been made by each individual per day. And
Hey,
I don't.
Sam, speaking of modern technology and remote work, I think your microphone's clipping or something a little bit. It was hard to understand you. If you could,
Oh, my apologies. I'll just double check
so now
that.
that sounds better. Maybe you just when you lean back, it might do it. Sorry, it was just getting hard to understand a little bit. No, I've seen the same trend. Uh,
Yeah.
and
So
I personally like it. You get more. I think you get more done without the drive and the stress of the drive and stuff.
mhm. I can personally say I now work on average from I would easily say an extra couple of hours a day, and that's because I'm down in my office in the basement. I have everything set up here for me. If I need to go and meet people, great. But of course, mainly now it's virtual meetings, phone, video, etc., VR for the future. But I'm a lot more efficient. And then if I need to get something done, I don't have a problem shooting downstairs to the basement to my office because I want to answer an email at 7:30.
Right.
And even my wife said she used to get annoyed that I'd come home having left the office an hour earlier, spent an hour commuting, then would come in, then would try and follow up on emails, things like that. She wanted family time. She wanted me
Right.
to be focused with the children, with her, which I totally understand. You take away a lot of that aspect and you give people a little bit more flexibility. And there's many surveys now that actually say people are more productive, and then they are more likely to actually put in more time because they can kind of do it on their own, on their own time as well, and they're
Right.
willing to do that because they haven't wasted 2 hours or 2.5 hours commuting, going to the train station, driving to the train station, getting off at the other end, walking, vice versa. It all adds up, and my commute back 3-4 years ago before COVID was pretty much the same thing. I was out and about, and I'd say my average was a 2-hour commute per day, both out and back. And now that time tends to go into the business, but it gives me flexibility to do family things when required. So yeah, I mean, the hybrid working, I see that as a sort of flexibility on the business's part. A lot of people would like to be fully remote, but when you think about hybrid as well, is nice to sit with someone, and we just touched on VR and get that feeling of camaraderie, of talking within an office. I understand that. And there's certain jobs, of course, you have to be on site. If you work in the manufacturing world, or if you're working in a testing lab, you can't do that remotely. There's obviously a lot of things that's hands-on and will never change.
I've experienced the same thing. I mean, I probably work more than ever, and I almost never leave this office, right? And I love to be able to sprinkle it in whenever I want to go, oh, I had a thought or I want to follow this up. It's not a problem. The one thing they have to, maybe VR will fix this for me, is I miss having a group of people in a conference room around a whiteboard. And I'm sure there's technology out there. I've tried every electronic version through Zoom and Google Meet, and it's just not the same as having that marker in your hand. Someone else has an idea and pass it off. But I think they'll get there. And I can tell you right now, when a client asks me to find them talent, the first thing I ask is it remote? And if not, it's gonna be way harder to find them somebody. And more often than not now, they'll be like, it can be remote, or yes, it's remote. So I think I'm seeing the trend with my clients for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been the same with mine. A lot more companies are now perfectly happy, especially for tech candidates. As we say, if you're working within a system, it doesn't really matter where you log on. And with the advancement in security and firewalls and, the actual databases themselves, and of course, we've talked about blockchain and the extra security there. There's, you look at that and you think, does that person need to come into an office to then sit in his cubicle and just be engrossed in his screen? And you kind of say no, because that person is going to spend 3 weeks working on a particular project, a lot of coding, a lot of testing, his own coding. That's what, as most coders do. And then you get the end product, and maybe you come in at that stage and work with a couple of others. So there's just, I believe there's a lot more flexibility that we've all got now.
Definitely.
And definitely seeing that within business.
One of the other things I noticed, we're speaking about like developers and coders. I'm having a hell of a time finding any of them, especially when I do government contract stuff. They still are pretty archaic, and I'll use this as a contrast point. They still have, like, if you're bidding a project, there'll be a skill level, and then all these add-ons, like, do they have a college degree? Do they have a computer science 4-year degree?
Mm-hmm.
And then the more of those people you have, the higher their rate can be, and the more people with the college education, etc. When you go to do that bid, that proposal, the more points you get to the top of the pile and become accepted. And I think they're really suffering from what I've seen. I don't think college degrees are keeping up with technology. I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't think they're keeping up at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think it needs to be skill-based now. When I'm looking for a developer, I want to see their portfolio. I want to know if they coded anything on their own time, like just for themselves. What was it? Why did they do it? What approach? What language did they program in, and why? And you can get and then you even look at their code. That means way more to me than a computer science degree. I've seen people with computer science degrees or PMO certification on the project program management side that can't get out of their own way skill-wise at all, but they have this pedigree. I don't know. I feel that needs to be relaxed now. It's more about, are you part of that for developers? Like, are you part of the Haskell community? If yes, that's a big, I'm like, all right, I want to talk to this person. He's probably got 500 other people that want to talk to him too. But, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing.
I am. To a certain extent. I'm trying to think of a couple of companies very recently. We had this discussion and they said, no, absolutely, I'm more interested in their technical abilities rather than their academic achievements.
Great.
And they asked, so they said, if we're going to do this, what I'd like to see is membership to whichever, whether it's GitHub, and have they got examples out there?
Right.
Have they worked? Because of course on GitHub you can go in and look at the different projects, and they've worked on other people's projects, so they'll be linked in as well, and they'll have their own projects. So a good a good example of a GitHub, I'll go in there and I'll see so many different folders and examples of actual coding, or somebody reached out and said to the community and said, could you help with this? And then you go into that folder and there's 3 or 4 different people have written some code and given examples and said, try this might work. And that's an excellent way to see, and as you mentioned, someone's thought process on solving a problem. Now, this is, to go back a little bit, we talked about this last time. Of course, the biggest problem we have is we're not producing enough engineers ourselves anyway. Right. Colleges are not filling their STEM curriculums. We have a large problem with that. And until we can actually get to a stage where we are putting enough people through school to fill the jobs that we have, and tech's getting more and more advanced, and of course it will do. And then, as I mentioned earlier, AI might change that, but hopefully not. But it's all, you've got to look at all the different factors and put them together and see what can we do, whether it be our side, the staffing, or whether it be, you look at your company where you've got your software side of the company. I've known you guys for a long, long time, and you've put together some amazing work over the years. And as you say, getting hold of a good developer / coder, whatever you want to call them, whatever their particular part of the branch is, it's tough. So examples are good. Now, also, a lot of us know that some of the big companies, Google, Meta, etc., Facebook, as it was at the time, they were just pulling the best students out of university saying, look, why are you doing this? I'll pay you ridiculous amounts of money to come and work for us because you're clearly that good. And I've seen your examples, and they were they tend to target second-year students that they'd researched and looked at. And also I know full well that they were approaching professors, and there might have been a few little envelopes flying around.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And, not to be too controversial, I almost think if universities are going to catch up, they're going to have to really zero set their curriculum. And I hope this doesn't anger anybody, but stop with, I won't use any particular disciplines, but stop with some of these degrees that absolutely have no chance of making any money. I'd like to see almost a nutritional label on the programs, like a ROI label. How long would it take you if you got a job from this degree to pay off your school? And if it's 50 years, they should not offer that discipline. And I had a developer who worked for me for many years, and when he came to me, he had no degree, but I had known him since he was younger in the .coms, and a brilliant guy. When he worked for me, because we did defense, I needed him to have that checkbox. He ended up going and gaming the system and getting his undergrad degree in, there's something ridiculous, like 4 or 6 months. He gamed the system and went to all these different classes. He never needed that degree except for me so he could bid. And now he's a high level consultant and speaker. Like his daily rate is $30,000 a day. And he only has an undergrad degree because I made him go get it. So, in this industry, if you're good, you don't necessarily need the degree. And I'm working with a large PMO for a supercomputing company right now, and only one of us, not me, has PMO certification. They plucked us from the best in the industry for running big, lots of moving parts, lots of change, daily change kind of large programs. And that person who has the PMO certification only just got it recently, just because she wanted it, right? So I'm starting to see a lot of this stuff. It's really, proof is in the pudding. And you can see from, interview in a project management standpoint or program management, you can interview them and see what they ran and ask them some pointed questions and scenarios and how they handle it. And you can say, yeah, they know what they're doing, right? They know the vocabulary, they know, etc. And same with a coder, look at their Git, etc. So I think there's going to be a day of reckoning for colleges coming up. I don't need to beat on it too much. For the audience out there, before we get off this topic, has anyone had your company sort of embrace the skill-based hiring versus degrees yet, or are you in the dark ages? Just feel free to type in there, and we can address some of those questions. But I'd like to know a bigger sampling than Sam and I, if what we're saying is an absolute trend or not. I believe it is.
And
So
again, I think it's very much industry dependent. Having, as I still say, with financial services, there tends to be a lot more on-site people. A lot more formal companies will still want the degrees, and obviously, we understand if you're working for a law firm, you're not going to work for a law firm unless you have a law degree.
right,
There's certain things that we still
like a
obviously.
surgeon, maybe a surgeon. I'd like them to be certified.
I would hope so. Yes. So we can laugh about it, but there's certain examples where, of course, it's never going to change. But I think this is more based around the tech side of things. And it's interesting to hear if we do have anyone sort of mention or talk about whether financial services, medical device, all these sorts of different things that are out there, and what they're feeling and seeing. So that'd be great.
Agreed. The next topic I want to go into is something that wasn't very prevalent when you and I first entered the workforce, but seems to be at the top of everyone's mind, and for in a lot of cases dividing the world or our nation like 50-50. And it's the social issues, and probably social media and the internet and all of that has something to do with this. But something that never came up when I was looking for a job at the beginning of my career was sustainability. And I'm starting to see that. I was stunned at first, but now it's starting to see it more candidates bringing it up. Like, they might not want to work for DuPont, for instance, not because it's DuPont, but because of what DuPont does. I don't mean to pick on any disclaimer, any particular company by name, but, I probably shouldn't have said that, but, they make chemicals and they have a different sustainability model than other companies. And I'm starting to see this sort of new generation of candidates being, very concerned about it. And now I have to ask those questions before I start looking for candidates. I never had to do that before because there's a good chance the candidate's going to ask me about these things. What's their footprint? How do they recycle, etc. Have you seen any of that?
I have, and it's funny. I've seen quite a bit recently. I've seen hedge funds and investment companies open whole sections based on ethical investments, green investments. You can look across the board.
That whole ESG thing, which I don't necessarily agree with, but yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So again, there's different ideas, but what I often say, whether we agree or not with a specific thing, I understand the idea, the ethos behind it. They're trying to improve things. They're trying to invest in companies that look at their CO2 emissions, that look at, are they putting waste into the water, things like that. And again, you can go really, really fine line with this, or you can go broad. Now, we see in politics all the time people saying, oh, we shouldn't have this oil pipeline, or we should have this oil pipeline, or this gas, or fracking, whatever. Now, again, fracking's changed because when it first was used, it was horrendous because it was just uncontrolled releasing of gas half the time, and it was ruining farmland, it was ruining rivers and people. It was awful. But now they've got that mainly under control, and they understand the science way better and what they need to do. Now, again, I know some people are still against fracking, and I think if it's controlled properly and you have experts on site really regulating and keeping it close, then it's not a bad thing. But again, I'm always open for the conversation, and I can be swayed either way. So you look at big politics talking about this, and you look at businesses, and that is interesting. And I'm seeing a lot of candidates, like you say, it's a generational thing. When we were getting our first jobs in the 80s, back then there was still, and I'm talking in Britain, you couldn't drive for half an hour without seeing a big stack of chimneys somewhere belching out gas. Now that's all changed. They've all gone. They've been imploded, and we've moved forward from the 80s. Then we got to the 2000s, and then it was the next step. And obviously, we're now looking at clean energy. There's just so much happened, and it'll always happen. But that's time. And again, with age, you can look back and think, well, honestly, yes, as a 16 to 18-year-old, I wasn't particularly thinking about it. But now I do. I'm now at an age where I have 2 teenage sons, and I'm worried about what they're going to be doing in the future and how it's going to affect them.
Exactly. My first big boy job, stainless steel tubing plant, and to keep the grease off of it when we rolled it and welded the tubes, we just had vats that the steel ribbon passed through that were filled with trichloroethane 3, and it just evaporated into the sky and probably, unfortunately, into my body. And we didn't think twice about it until it started getting regulated and expensive. And then we went to some citrus-based thing that ultimately we made work. And that's all it took. And I'm glad. I think that was bad for me to breathe, and I know it's an ozone depleting. And I mean, talking hundreds of gallons a day evaporating, hundreds,
Yeah.
in that one little factory. And so I believe there's a place for it as long as you push the balloon. If regulation gets too much and destroys an economy, that's one thing. If you let it go too free and everybody's poisoned, that's another. We got to strike a balance. I mean, one statistic I saw is like 83% of people right now surveyed think their workplace isn't doing enough for the climate. I mean, if you did that in the 80s, it'd be like I'm making up, but it'd be like 10% maybe. Unless you were in Maine or something.
Yeah. And if you understood the science now, that's where, and again, I remember a lot of these sort of programs that we had back in Britain, and one was called Tomorrow's World, and it always had fascinating insights into science, and they would talk about pollution, they'd talk about, maybe in 20 years, we'll have these filters that will take this out. And of course, now, even those filters, of course, are 30 years out of date.
Yeah.
It is. Things move on. Now, going back to the original question, and I definitely have many conversations now with people looking for jobs, and not just coming straight out of school, but we've got people that, that have been in the workforce and have seen and experienced certain things and said, look, I don't want to work for an unethical company again. I'd rather work for a company that's going to invest their time, energy, and efforts into doing the right thing globally. And by globally, I mean, excuse
me. I love the ringing.
Yeah, I know. And and it's so people are asking those questions. They are asking me, what do you know about this company? What do you know what their thoughts are on this? And again, a lot of the time I do my research beforehand. Like you said, you have to be able to answer these questions. So it's not so bad when I'm working for a particular hedge fund that I know is very much on board, that have particular funds that are based on green future energy, right, for example, or this or that. And again, I'm not an expert, but there's enough out there that you can actually say, okay, I would like this fund, this fund, this fund. I'm going to invest my money in those because the returns are good, but they're all based off ethical companies. So people are aware, I believe, and are thinking.
I mean, so I work for a supercomputing company. They make supercomputers, and our design uses nearly half the power of a normal supercomputer. So you've got all these Silicon Valley types all about the environment and all that, but they all want their large language models on these giant servers everywhere, which, one data center of these supercomputers is like 50 neighborhoods in power consumption. And ours is half of that. So we're very, very proud of that. There are some laws of physics. You can't really get it down much lower than that, at least not with current technologies. And that's a big attractant for talent, for the top talent in the silicon industry and the supercomputer industry to come over to that company. So I know it exists. I mean, another thing I've noticed is, people, if any companies are sort of against remote work, there could be a 37% cut in their CO2 emissions just by going remote to stop their own employees from computing. So if they wanted to get a big hit on that, they could probably retain more employees, get better employees, and also get a 3 for 37% decrease in CO2.
And again, just by taking away a commute, you think whether it be a train, a car, not a bike, that would be good. That's green. Yeah. But for example, taking away some of those commuting times. And again, I'm in the Boston area. if you want to drive into Boston in the morning from any of the suburbs, you're talking an hour commute. So you're slowly, you think about all those cars just chuffing out
Yep.
fumes. And of course, we know there's electric cars, and the industry's up one minute, down the next, and
Yeah, the
people.
thing, I mean, I had one, and I'm not going to lie to anybody and say I had it because it was green. I had it because it was cool. Um, they burn coal right now, coal or natural gas. There's
Hmm.
they're not being charged by a windmill. I'm sorry. I mean, most of them are not. So that there's a lot of a lot of people glom on and say they're green or I'm going to go green without doing the actual math. But yeah, either way, you moved it. Actually, in Britain, I can't remember the term, but they don't call it like a green electric car green. They call it like you moved the pollution to a different place. So like you concentrated it at the power plant, like it was a pollution or carbon exchange more than it was carbon neutral. And I loved the Brits for doing that. I wish I remembered the term. So here, the next topic is one that kind of makes me cringe, but it needs to be talked about, and that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm seeing, especially the younger employees, I'm seeing a real large focus on that. Um, my personal opinion, and I'll go out on a limb. I think the market should drive it more than policy,
Mhm.
and I
Yep.
think merit. We're a meritocracy, believe it or not. People don't want to see that should drive it. It should be strived towards. Obviously, diverse groups of different cultures and thought processes and outlooks is super important to get innovation. But
Mhm.
if if you force the market to do it, particularly to hit a number or a goal, I, a jury is out for me that would be as effective as just striving for the market
Yeah.
to do it. But um,
Yep.
I don't know
Well,
if you see that at all with the
I
candidates.
do. And I've been on plenty of DE and I boards in the last 10 years. And being in the recruiting industry, working for one of the companies, we'd have regular conversations with our clients, and we're talking about a company where we were running MSPs, and of course they would come to us very gingerly and say, we need this job filled, but could you get us? And then you could hear their minds thinking of the
It's a gray area, right? Can you get us
yeah,
a
it
person?
is. And no, I'll add straight away. I'm a 50-year-old white guy. I'm an immigrant because I'm British.
Yeah,
I'm also a disabled veteran. That doesn't affect me, but that's official. So I fit in a couple of buckets myself. But I am a white 50-year-old guy. Um, I live in the Boston area and surrounded by towns that are very diverse.
yeah,
My particular town isn't, and we're very honest about that. And the town is working very hard to make sure, considering we're in the Boston area, right on the Boston city limits, that D and I is the forethought of a lot of people. Now we obviously, again, I won't get up on the subject here, and I won't get into politics. There's a lot of immigration going on at the moment, whether it's legal or not, and it's not going to stop. Now,
right.
how we evolve this into something a positive, which is what we need to be looking at, because I will say immigration is never going to stop, not to a country like America. Now, we obviously all know this is a country based on immigrants, and we still need immigration. We need, H-1B visa candidates from all over the world to come in, and specifically in technology, because of our shortage of
Right.
STEM people.
It's similar to what I talked about over regulation and under regulation. It's kind of that balance point again. I feel because you know immigration's completely necessary for growth and innovation,
Yeah.
etc. But rampant, just crazy, open the floodgates, um, non merit based uh, is going to flood a particular demographic potentially, and not really not in the short term anyway, maybe 50, 60, a few generations from now, maybe if uh,
Maybe yes.
if they have the
Yeah.
opportunities for education and all that. That's a different topic. So it's needed, but it's also, there has to be a certain amount of regulation, not so stifling that no one can get in here like some of the Nordic countries or something, but there has to be a balance point, I think. And
There is, and that's the crazy thing. Being an Englishman that came over because my wife's American. I was still serving in the military, and she came to live in England, so I could come back because I was married to a U.S. citizen. So I actually had an easy path compared to a lot
yeah,
of people. A
well,
normal,
sure, it wasn't probably easy, but
no, it wasn't. It was probably a year-long process, including
yeah,
multiple trips to the American Embassy in London,
right,
inter- interviews, and I've often said I had letters from an admiral recommending, what a fine, upstanding gentleman I
right,
was, and that did help a little bit. And the fact that I was a veteran, and it was very easy for them to track what I've been doing because I was a government employee. Um, but it's so difficult. So, and again, I don't want to go just onto immigration and go away from their D and I part. What I see, and what I see a lot of, is we have communities here in Boston that have grown. Out in a town called Framingham, we have a very, very strong Brazilian community. And I just had a great example of using all Brazilian contractors to do an addition to my house. Best experience, absolutely amazing.
yeah,
If you had asked to do that 20 years ago here in Boston, every one of them would have been Irish.
yeah,
I've got plenty of Irish friends, and I often talk to them, and they're saying, yeah, we kind of got away from that, and these are ex carpenters, and so on and so forth, and they've changed track. Now things will change, but we need to do a better job at involving communities that are underrepresented in all
right.
aspects of business.
Part of that for me is, we're supposed to have equal schools,
Mhm.
government schools, public schools, and we don't. And I've always been, as a business owner, really irked that you fail the urban and rural areas from a school perspective, and then throw them with barely the reading level they're supposed to have, and then come after the business that doesn't hire them. Like me being software development, I can't hire somebody who can't do math or doesn't know how to code. I make
Yep.
software, and
Yeah.
I had a similar experience. I had a person in my graduate school, my business degree. She was like, "Your company's all men, software development, defense industry." I said, "Yes, and
Mhm.
they're all U.S. citizens too, because I'm mandated by law because of what we work
Yeah.
on. They have to be U.S. citizens." I go, "Now," I said, "let's walk," because we were in business school. I said, "You want to walk down to the computer science floor and look in a lecture hall?" And I say, "The first filter you apply is U.S. citizen, and then whoever's left, then female." I go, "There's probably three females in the whole class." This was a while ago, I'm sure. I
Yes. Yeah.
hope. And I go, out of those three, maybe one of them's a U.S. citizen and already has 20 job offers. They're probably trying to poach her out of here, like you were talking earlier,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
trying to get her out of here without even finishing the degree. So I go, it's not. I didn't. I'm not trying to have just all men in
No.
my workforce, but that was a reality, and that's it's. I guess my point is, it's all the way from the upstream. It starts with the education, the STEM programs, and
Hmm.
they have things like Girls That Code. When I first started my company, that didn't exist yet, and we need to see more of that, and we need to get better. The schools need to get better. Whether and there's many
Yeah.
ways to do it, you know. And I'm not advocating any particular way, but anything from school choice and competition in schooling, etc. Uh,
Yeah.
we
It's very
somehow
much.
we have to get the education. There's many other countries, Japan, China, India, where even a kid in the slum of India can come out with a master's in mathematics on merit,
Yep.
right? And they because they know that's the key, and we're just
Mm.
not doing that. And then trying to fix it on the end with some federal mandate or policy doesn't change the fact that they don't have the base knowledge needed to do that
Yeah.
particular job.
You need to. You're 100% right. You need to go right down to the core problem, which starts in the communities and the schools and the public schools. Are kids getting the best advice in inner cities? 10 times out of 10, no, they're not. and
Exactly.
it's like
And the
factory.
rural areas are hurting too. It's really
Yeah,
and I have nothing against the suburbs. I'm suburban born and bred. My dad came from the Polish ghetto, but got us into the suburbs. Uh, Barely able to afford the mortgage there, but we had really good schools, and that's because
mhm,
of where we were. And there were small communities, nuclear families, etc. But in rural America, believe it or not, and in urban America, it's not the case. I mean,
mhm.
they're underfunded. Uh, they're distracted by trying to survive and live and eat. It's a big problem, and we
Yeah,
could fix the schools if we gave some competition or something in
yeah.
both areas.
It's fascinating, and that's a subject that we could branch off
Oh, for
and just
hours.
talk on forever. Yeah, but obviously today is not about that. We're trying to keep within the confines. But I know you and I have had these conversations. We
Yeah,
start talking about something, and then I'm an hour and a half later going, "Oh my God, are we still talking?" But
yeah,
we love to think about it. How can we make things better? And that's eventually, somebody will come up with a great idea. And again, obviously, I understand there's many government agencies, private agencies that are trying to make some of these communities a lot better. And I'm talking whether it be rural, whether it be in a city, and you can look at the race factor and demographics. We are not tapping America's potential. I mean, we can't even manufacture here anymore, barely. We
I
can't
know.
afford to. So there's many deeper problems that we could get into, but that'll be for another day.
Agreed. We have many topics. I like doing
Yes.
these with you. Um, so we've been talking a lot from the business perspective. I think we've got a whole nother thing. I don't want to run out of time here. Um, the perspective of the candidates themselves, and I've noticed, as I'm sure you have, and this is naturally how it works. There's as the Gen Zers are sort of aging out of the education system that we just had a big talk about, and they're entering the workforce en masse. And I mean, from my perspective, and I've had many work for me, and still work for me. Uh, they have a really different attitude, uh, you know,
Mhm.
than I've ever seen. Almost like, how come I'm not CEO attitude? There's this confidence. I'll be nice and call it confidence that some of them have without the experience. Uh, but that aside, that's just me venting a little bit. Um, have you seen some of the culture shock and the Gen Zers? I don't want to say they're not experiencing the culture shock in the business. I think the businesses are literally experiencing the culture shock from the Gen Z, right?
Yeah.
They've
Mm.
It's never been this way before. Have you seen?
Yes, and I agree with what you say there. I think the businesses are seeing the shock now, because obviously, as time goes by and people become more educated in certain things, or more educated stroke opinionated. And there's nothing wrong with either. It's good that people have opinions. If you're not asking questions and having your own opinion, how are you going to have a good debate? How are you going to develop a diversified opinion? Because if you don't discuss it, if you don't have the
Right.
competence and skills to discuss it, we're not going to advance, and that's been a good thing. Now, with what I'm seeing with Gen Z is, and again, my oldest son, I'll count as, he's heading, towards the workforce pretty soon. And again, some people I feel they just have a lot more information now. And again, we're in the information age. If they want to know something, it's 2 seconds on the phone, Google, bang,
Yeah.
or Siri or whatever.
I know a guy who's a really amazing welder. He's done some work for me, and he just watched it all on YouTube and taught himself. So
It's a different world, and I was actually doing that this morning myself, just for a little home project, and I just wanted to double check something, so I popped onto YouTube, watched 2 quick videos, and said, "Yep, it is what I thought it was," and etc.
I
But again, that's the difference in generation. It's everything happens like that. It's a case of, you want some information now, you want to phone someone, it happens now, or you
instant.
need to contact them, you can tweet them, WhatsApp them, email them, phone call, text. It's endless, and it tends to happen now. Now that's what I'm definitely seeing as
Yep.
people want. You mentioned it. They kind of want the promotion now before they've
Right.
even started, and you're like, well, hang on a second.
I
You
think
have to do the groundwork.
exactly. And I think the day of reckoning eventually will come. But as you said, and we've discussed in this webinar and others, there's such a huge demand. Like pretty much anybody with technical skills, or what they would call in our day a white collar job skills, can go find another job very easily right now. There's a big sucking sound for talent. You combine that with this cohorts is they surveyed them, and they're the least likely to stay in their job, a job that they don't like. And
Mhm.
part of becoming a professional is experience. And if you keep bebopping around, um, you don't gain that experience. And I think that's the rub for businesses. You get this person right out of school with a lot of knowledge and access to instant information, but no actual experience in having tried to implement something similar before, or tried to
Yeah,
run a team this way or structure a team that way. I mean, there's things of getting your chops,
yeah,
cutting your
yeah,
chops, that are vitally important. And I'm finding now, uh, very bleeding edge high tech companies are plucking gray hairs like me out of semi retirement to run the groups of of these Gen Zers until
mhm,
the training wheels can come off from a bit. And I don't mean to be condescending or anything, but there is a lot to learn that has nothing to do with math,
yeah,
coding, or anything. Personal interaction, managing, working on a team, a lot of these things, managing up the
mhm,
chain of command, managing down, managing sideways. Those are all things that you can read all you want and learn some stuff, but you have to do it, because each person you manage or work with is a different personality, a different ecosystem, and you have to start being able to quickly see the patterns. And I think
yeah,
and I once the sort of uh, we've had the quiet quitting and the rage applying and all of these things. I don't know if you've seen those. If the environment is not there to support it, and people are hungry and they want a job and they want to buy a house or have an apartment or not live with roommates, I think that day of reckoning is coming. It can't sustain like this.
yeah. And there's something, there's a word that we don't hear very often now, and that's apprenticeship,
Yeah.
which I go back and think to when I was a teenager making the decision what I was going to do in the workforce, whether I was going to carry on my education. Uh, Inevitably, I joined the military at 18, and I carried on and did my engineering degree over a 12-year period in the military.
Yep.
Um, because I changed branches from engineer to diver, and experienced lots of other things. Now, uh, to me, everybody did an apprenticeship back in the day. And it's not just engineering. I mean, if you wanted to be an accountant, it might not have been called apprenticeship, but you went to an office and you ran paper round. For the rest of the accountants, you did all the menial tasks, you learnt your way. Now, that's the difference now, is nobody wants to do that part. They want to go in there and say, well, I want to be a businessman, and I want to sit at a desk, and I want to do this. That's all great, but doing what? You
Yeah.
know, please.
Exactly.
And the amount of people I talk to that say, "Well, yeah, I want to be in business." That's great. That doesn't mean anything.
Right.
We're all in business in one way or another, but just you need to specify. Do you have any desires to, is it going to be product based? Is it going to be technology based business? Are you going to look at marketing? There's so many facets to business. So
Yes.
you need to sit down and really think and spend time, because you've got all access to all these platforms that can give you information. It's no good just being in this sort of vast array of, I want to go to this company. Again, great, but what's your aim? If you go into
Right.
a big, as a 21-year-old new graduate, you're not going to be handling large
Yeah.
accounts and yeah,
And technology and coding, I think, has changed. There's so many opportunities for an 18 to 20-year-old that you and I didn't have. If you wanted to get money right out of school, you became an engineer, right? I
Mhm.
I was an electrical apprentice to put myself through my undergrad, so I had that. I became a journeyman eventually to fall back on. And now, between YouTube, coding, and all this screen time stuff, or being an influencer, there's a lot of different areas that young people can go into. And I think that's messing up the business market a little bit, because they can just say, well, I'm going to go try this now. I'm going to go do this. And that's great to an extent, until at some point you have to settle down and figure out what you want to do. And that attrition, I've noticed now to keep employees, a lot of these businesses are starting to, I don't know if you're seeing this, but they're doing more internal promotion and sending their people to get the skills, upskilling, I believe they call it.
Absolutely.
Because they don't want that volatility. I even talked to, I'll leave the person's name out, but a prominent CEO of a very large tech company, and he goes, "Oh, we hire them all the time. They have lots of talent." And he goes, "When they don't like reality of our business, we're pretty progressive because we're a tech company." He goes, "We let them go, and they go out and see what the rest of the world's like, and then we love to get them on the backswing and come back after they saw how good they actually had it at our company." And I was like, "Oh my God, I've done the same thing at NBI." I'm like, look, nothing. You're not an indentured servant. Go. And all of a sudden, 6 months, a year later, they're back on your radar going, "Hey, is there anything going on with your company?" So sometimes, if you love something, let it go. Kind of a situation. And I think a lot of companies are starting to do that in this internal promotion and upskilling, and which is great. It also makes you want to be in that company. Oh, I could become this. I'm not just stuck in the bean counting department. I could go attempt to be this.
Yeah,
I think that's
100%. And on top of that, a lot of companies now have a lot more thought on positivity within the workplace, well-being. And we've seen that probably over the last 15 years, where it's very normal that there's a gym membership. There's, for your physical health. There's also a lot of companies now will give mental health offerings, online or phone call to talk to a therapist, and that's all through the company. And we all have bad days, bad weeks, bad months at work. It happens.
I recently saw a survey that said 46% of employees say they're stressed out and anxious at work, mostly due to workload. And I mean, I experienced that personally. So yeah, having well-being and positivity sessions, but it turns out I don't think many companies are measuring it. I think I read another survey, like only 49% of employers are measuring well-being. So that's probably a spot that's going to help people eliminate attrition a little bit. And I've been telling my clients, do you have one of these programs? Have you considered one? Because having that is also an attractant for
it is, and that's us talking about the Gen Z candidates. They want to be
Sam, I lost track of time. My timer is out of sync with the actual time. So, so we better conclude before we get kicked off here. So we're out of time. If everybody wants to get a resource guide about some of these topics we talked about and actual action items to address them, you can go to the nowbusinessintelligence.com/embrace change download. Sam, do you have any closing thoughts before we move on?
No, not at all. It was a great conversation as always. We touched on subjects, and again, we keep on mentioning we'll try and get a bit more audience participation. I'd love to hear what people are experiencing. What are their pain points? So as we move forward and grow this, hopefully a bit more interactive.
Yeah, and anybody watching this recorded who didn't attend, shoot Sam or myself questions through LinkedIn messaging or however you want to get a hold of us. That's probably the easiest way, and we'd be happy to sidebar with you or give you our insight on that.
Right. Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. It was great.